All right. Um, Phoenix Aurelius, thank you so much for being on Radiant Creators today. Time to catch up. Phoenix Aurelius, literally a modern day alchemist Renaissance man, creating his own form of alchemy. Aurelian, I hope I'm saying it right, Aurelian
Yeah.
uh, 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 alchemy, because the old stuff, well, it's time to catch up, time to rebrand it. And I do believe that Phoenix's new book that's coming out soon will really be the maybe first real new alchemical text since his mentor stopped publishing.
Yeah, very well could have been. I mean, at least since the 1500s. I mean, there have been a decent amount of really good alchemical books that have come out in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, but all of them are like looking at things from a historical perspective and teaching about what old alchemists did for the most part. And some of them are still really great books and really great resources, but to try and really bring things up and not just be recapitulating an old dead tradition, but bringing things into the light of modern science and updating things and other things like that. Yeah, I think it'll be a really fantastic book and a wonderful standard. The first time in history that there will have been an alchemical standard for various items of pharmacopoeia.
Yeah, and that is a new thing. And so you just moved off the grid. And by the way, I'll just mention everybody while you're listening to this, a good site to go and peruse is phoenixaurelius.org. And so it's just Phoenix, like the bird, Aurelius, AURELIUS.org. While you're listening, if you feel like it, that's a good site to go and check out. So there you go. Um, so you just moved the headquarters there to completely off grid, which I have to admit I completely envy because that's our goal as well. To live off the grid completely, but comfortably, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so now you are, I guess, down a long dirt road or something like that. You're a little bit deep, and that just sounds, wonderful. So how are you feeling? Do you feel it? Do you feel a difference now that you're away from your neighbor's Wi-Fi signal?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we were already in a pretty distant spot before, so we could only pick up on one other Wi-Fi signal at our
Mm,
old house when we lived in Utah, and we had about 2.5 acres of distance
mm.
between us and the nearest house, so we had a decent amount of space, but that's still just way too cramped for me. If I can walk to my neighbor's house in less than 10 minutes, that's far too close for me. So yeah, we definitely feel a difference. I mean, but there's a lot of things that actually kind of contribute to that. So one thing is living off grid, especially our particular setup. We have a solar array, and one thing that most people don't know is that when you have a solar inverter, or just an inverter that turns the DC energy into AC energy and pumps it through the house so that you can use, your typical AC outlets, it's extremely hazardous. You have huge levels of radiation unless you have like a stetserizer or a filter on there of
Oh,
possible radiation. So when we moved into the house, I was just walking around with my TF2, its tri-field meter, and just checking out standard and weighted electrical fields. I mean, they were outrageously high, and that was a big part of the problem in our old place. Anyway, was just the way that the house was. So here's another bit of info that a lot of people probably don't know is that if you have solar on your house, but you don't necessarily have an inverter, or if your neighbors have solar on their house and you are still connected to the grid, then what ends up happening is that you're not just getting 50 to 60 hertz sine wave moving through the current, of all of your electricity. You actually oftentimes will get crazy spikes and weird anomalies that end up happening anytime that solar is being fed back through the system. So that's true if
mm.
people on either side of you have solar, even if you don't, it's going to affect the amount of electricity that's coming through for you if you're also connected in on grid, and they are as well. And so unbeknownst to me, I was doing everything that I could, utilizing various grounding equipment and other things. And those grounding pads that they sell plug into the wall like this, I was using those.
Yeah.
These are ultra dangerous. They'll damn near kill you. So people just don't really realize exactly how toxic EMF radiation is and all of the different ways of curing it. And realistically, I didn't know a lot of things either until I started having weird mitochondrial dysfunction issues, which I was able to catch early because, you know, I utilized the intrinsic data field analysis, but I was constantly broadcasting to myself, constantly taking care of issues. I just couldn't figure out exactly what was going on. Well, I was being cooked by radiation, and not necessarily Wi-Fi, but being cooked just by all of the peripherals that are plugged in. In fact, you know, even when we got set up here, I've got along this wall that I'm sitting at here, we've got 4 computers. We have my wife's station, and which is a fulfillment and shipping station. And then I have 3 computers and 3 monitors over here. And off of every single one of those, we had something like 740 volt meters coming off of those, including the wired peripherals like the keyboard, the mouse, my SE5 equipment, and other things. So I couldn't really, like, I could keep them on, but I couldn't stay in this room for any length of time because even that was cooking us. And it has taken a little bit over $1,500 and about 6 months and some trial and error to figure out how to be able to safely ground those levels off. And I actually never would have been able to do it without the help of Sean Cranish from electrahealth.com.
Electrahealth.com. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, living off grid in general is great. My wife and I ended up going without electricity, and we still do to this office. So from the time we moved in November until now, in the evening time, we just use oil lamps. We don't really use electrical. There's a small little area in the kitchen with one outlet where we can use a little electrical if we need it to run a grain grinder or whatever else. We just decided, nah, we're not going to be playing these games. Electromagnetism is just harmful and it's pure poison, and it's not really a great thing to be around. And there's really no safe way of engaging with it, actually. Everybody is causing themselves immense cellular damage by engaging with what we call NN-EMFs, or non-natural EMF radiation. So it's just yes, it's been a huge learning curve for us, but every day, you know, we get out, we're barefoot, walking in the forest, staying grounded, and you know, there's no cell service or anything like that out here. We're so, you know, deep off grid. So it's definitely been extraordinary for our health, and mitochondrial health has popped right back up, and things are going great. So
wow. When you go off grid like that, like you've done, that's what my head not really, you know, thought of, was that when you clear out so much that, you know, comes to living in a, you know, populated area, especially a city, then you can fine tune. You know, you go, oh, I'd never really caught this before, but look, oh, this is an issue. You know, yeah. And like EMFs, that's really, you know, and that's the thing too. Even driving, you know, a lot of modern cars put out, you know, your old, like, you know, 60s or 70s, you know, totally aspirated, non-fuel injected engine, etc. That just pretty much a little bit of EMFs around the spark plug wires, but in general, it's just kind of, you're doing pretty good, you know. But a lot of electric vehicles, a lot of like your modern vehicles. I mean, some modern vehicles have, you know, hotspots built into them that are always on, even if you're, so you can pay for that service. You can say, oh, I want to have 3 or 4 or 5G, whatever, in my car as a hotspot. But regardless, that even if you're, that's great if you're engaging with it, but even if you're not, it's still on. And that's kind of the surveillance state. I mean, they're they're watching you. That the car has to be able to communicate back with, you know, its masters. And so, you know, just driving around, you're getting quite the full spectrum of bad stuff.
Yeah, well, and all of the other cars around you,
Yes.
and, you know, not being able to be grounded, being up on rubber, you know, So yeah, it's a bad thing. And then, people wonder why kids are autistic these days, and why everybody has neuroaffective disorders, and why they have brain fog, and why they're looking to diet in a lot of cases, which isn't wrong. Those are big contributing factors, but I mean, the amount of leaky brain that people have from the blood-brain barrier being so completely weakened by exposure to Wi-Fi fields in particular, but any form of wireless radiation. And you had mentioned some EMFs, kind of like around spark plugs and around circuitry and things like that. Usually, that's not a concern within your vehicle because you're running DC energy. DC energy is what Tesla was also talking about. He advocated for direct current because it's not nearly as dangerous. Alternating current is extremely. Actually, what I should say is Tesla mentioned safety a number of times between AC and DC. If we were to use Tesla's actual patents in order to produce his alternating current energy, things would be infinitely safer, and that's what he was oftentimes talking about. And when we talk about you know other developers that we ended up going with that technology, they started utilizing alternating current because it didn't need as many repeater stations, so that they could set up a grid over very, very long distances. And yeah, this alternating current energy, I mean, we really, as a civilization, probably need to consider getting rid of it. Although I'm of the persuasion that the sun will do that for us here in the next few years. So,
And that's something we'll definitely touch on as we go along, because I'm excited about it in a way. Not in a morbid way, but
right.
so well, so that's great. So you're really off grid, you're feeling it, and you found things that you hadn't quite ever been able to hone in on before. Because I look at like where we're living, and it would be hard to hone in on one thing. We can turn our Wi-Fi router off fine, but there's 100 within a 16th of a mile more. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, um, so I've oftentimes thought that like our goal for a greenhouse, as we call it, is like the standard is in the morning and the evening you should see deer in your yard.
Yep.
If you don't, you're dying.
Yeah.
You're basically, if there aren't deer in your front and backyard in the morning, in the evening, you're sick. You're not well. And along with that, I want to be able to have a shooting range in my backyard. I want to have 100 yards. Boom. Where I don't
Yeah.
have to go to the range. I want to just have my little, area set up, and so those are my two requirements: shooting range and deers.
Yeah, which I think that's absolutely fantastic. And although I don't have a formal range set up, one of my very good buddies, Charlie, and his wife moved probably about a half an hour away from us, and they're still kind of in the process of moving from Ohio to out here. And he wanted to do the same thing. He's a sharpshooter, and so he wanted to have a 200-yard range right off the back porch, and that's what he's got now. So.
Oh, that's the best. That's just an essential thing. I really do believe so. And so 100%. So right now, and we'll definitely talk about your spagyrics and the products that you're selling and such. And I definitely want to get into your I think you called it your SC5 machine. I know that it's kind of SKIO is what I'm familiar with, but I know yours is different. But one thing I wanted to mention is, or touch upon, is I feel like along with the sun, so some of us know that we have our grand solar minimum and maximum cycles. Then we have longer cycles. Us humans tend to think about a week or a year or a human lifetime, but there are longer cycles. And I think that some, civilizations on our planet are more aware of that. Like I really think that like the Asians, the Chinese, they've been keeping records for a lot longer. I think the Russian part of Europe, Russia. There's other cultures that are, well, the Mayans. I mean, there's other cultures that they think in times of like ages. And I think it's something that I've been reading a lot of Tolkien recently, and one of the things
Mhm.
about that I really think is important is, within the context of that story, there really are, well, it happens within one age, but there's 3 ages.
Mhm.
And we don't really think about ages, and we don't really think about 1,000-year, 2,000-year sun cycles, 250-year sun cycles, grand solar minimums and maximums, 11-year, like a sun year is 11 years,
Yep.
and it does, I think, a pole reversal during that time. I think that, and so we don't have this broader perspective. And so you mentioned in a few years we might see some changes, and I'd ask, what do you think those changes from the sun will be? And of course, if people are watching, you're seeing it now. Some the weather around the Earth, if people aren't noticing, it's pretty radical. But also, I feel like with that change in the sun, this sort of reset that we're having, I look at it as a change of an age.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that? Like, what's the sun doing, and how's that going to affect us? And are we moving? I feel like we're in the static between two radio stations. I feel like we're in the static between ages.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of actually describing it. Yeah, and it seems to be very much so that thing. And of course, there are cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles. But what we see in the geological records is that every once in a while, we'll see that the polar, that the North Pole or the South Pole of the planet are actually in entirely different places. Geologically, at one point, there are fossils of palm trees that are in Antarctica right now,
Yes.
way under the ice. That seems strange. How does that one happen? Is that just a general quote unquote global warming thing, or are there better mechanisms to it? And realistically, part of the problem with science just in general these days is that people do not study science all the way across the board. They tend to specialize in one thing. And this is true whether we're talking about medical sciences, which is a huge thing of mine, where people are very myopic because they only know a little bit about a little bit, or they know a lot about a little bit, instead of having a much bigger, broader perspective. And Dr. Phil Callahan, who is an entomologist and a number of other things, he always talked about this in terms of agriculture as well, saying that we need more generalists in the world and not specialists, because generalists are able to look at things with a much, much broader perspective and be able to put things together. And that's essentially what we have been able to do, is to take a look at data that is produced by specialist organizations across the world that have this data, this data, this data, this data. And then you get somebody who understands enough about all of those sciences that they can put the picture together. And so when we take a look at the disciplines of archaeology, when we take a look at the disciplines of electromagnetic sciences, when we take a look at the disciplines of astronomy, particularly solar astronomy and solar geomagnetic anomalies and activity, and we start putting things together, we can see that the Earth has actually swapped pole places a number of times. Now, it's not like, so the generally accepted model, and I understand that this isn't the case so much these days, because there's a lot of flat Earth enthusiasts and other things like that out there who would disagree with this model. But for the point of conversation, based on the science that exists at present, the way I'm going to discuss is that, our Earth is at a tilt at an axis like this. And then we have a north pole of the planet and we have a south pole of the planet. And what essentially ends up happening is that these poles are determined electromagnetically, specifically magnetically, but electromagnetically. And we have this magnetosphere around the planet. When the magnetosphere and the electromagnetic field end up weakening very significantly, you can pretty much tell that there's going to be a pole flip that ends up happening. And through astronomical observation, we're seeing this across all of the bodies in our solar system right now, in addition to the sun itself, which, like you mentioned, can actually flip its poles once about every 11 years during a solar maximum, when it starts putting off a ton of what we call SGMA, or solar geomagnetic activity, solar flares, high solar winds, coronal mass ejections, etc., high sunspot activity. All of these types of things are indicative that we're going through these high solar events. Now, simultaneously, all of that has an electronic charge to it, either a positive charge or a negative charge. And when those positive or negative charges end up reaching our electromagnetic field of the Earth, that ends up having an impact on our Earth as well as the magnetosphere and or electromagnetic field of all other planets as well. And it polarizes it by typically adding a ton of protons, which are positively charged materials, to the environment. And eventually this ends up weakening the entire electromagnetic field. And once the field gets weakened massively, then a pole flip or a pole shift can happen. Now, anybody who's been watching all of the data on where the North Pole, the magnetic North Pole, has actually moved to just over the last, 50, 60, 70 years, you can see that it went from, where Santa was living, in the North Pole area, and it's all the way now kind of drifting east into Siberia. Drifting west, but into eastern Siberia is what I mean to say. So we have moved very, very, very considerably. And what seems to be happening is that by the time the sun actually, and it could be another 3 to 5 years, it could be up to another 25 years. It's really hard to know on these things, but what we have seen already is a weakening of our own electromagnetic field here on the planet, that we are getting increased levels of cosmic rays and of solar radiation, particularly of UVA and UVB rays, which is very obvious. Anybody can go outside and talk about, like, quote unquote global warming or climate change. A lot of idiots are still talking about things in terms of, oh, it's us burning the fossil fuels and blah, 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 blah. Actually, probably not. I'm not going to say that that is without consequence, because we are toxifying the world massively through those types of actions, because it's a very dirty fuel source. There are tons of heavy metals and dioxins and other different things that we're getting through petroleum agriculture and even burning and incineration of these types of materials. So we are toxifying our environment massively, but the climate itself is actually changing primarily. Now there may be little bits that we're increasing, but not much in comparison to what the sun is doing, just by allowing more of this radiation in. The more radiation that comes in, of course, the hotter it's going to be, because that's part of the effect of radiation. That's why people, I don't, but that's why some people utilize a microwave. They use microwave radiation in order to heat things up, and the very same concept is happening with our planet. We've just decreased our field enough that solar radiation and also cosmic rays are kind of cooking the planet, cooking the environment a little bit. It's all part of the natural cycle. Things will probably flip. Depending on who you subscribe to and whose models of it you appreciate, that things could get extraordinarily catastrophic. And also possibly there are mechanisms that we don't even understand that could prevent things from getting too catastrophic. So there's a lot of uncertainty just all the way around the board in terms of the science. I think we're going to have to go through one of these events to really understand it, because the last times that things like this happened, which would have been far pre-dynastic ancient Egypt, circa 10 to 11,000 years ago, the records that we have still surviving, either oral or written down at a certain point, they would have been passed down orally for a long time, but then eventually put into stone and other things like this, are probably signs that are telling us about pole flips, and also trying to tell us, here's what happens, and it can be catastrophic, and that's why we moved here. But at the time that Egypt was initially settled, it was not a desert. It was a very jungled environment. So, much like Central Africa is now. So it appears that we will probably, the pole from the Carrington event, which happened somewhere between 1840s and 1860s, I believe, but essentially, from that point to the point where we're heading, there's probably going to be close to a 90-degree shift in magnetic poles, and scientists still are not all together on what the ramifications of that mean, whether the axis of the Earth is also going to change in the area that is tilted toward the sun or not. Ben Davidson of Spaced Weather News. I think
Suspicious Observers, right?
I think that used to be his old channel, Suspicious
Oh,
of.
okay.
I think he
Oh,
changed
I'm
it.
sorry. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So, sorry about that. Keep going. Keep going. I got
Yeah, no worries.
confused. Yeah.
But yeah, if he's correct, then there could be, you know, a 90-degree pole shift that is happening, and he's definitely followed this a lot more. But he also has a little bit of kind of like a fear thing, like you better get ready and get prepared. That being said, from a biochemistry perspective, I don't know that there's a whole lot of preparing to be done. If you're living on the surface of the Earth and there are plasma storms, well, I don't think that that's going to necessarily be too awesome for you. And if you're living underground, I don't think that it's going to be that much better, because when proton storms happen, those protons make their way down to the surface of the Earth and they get into what's known as the global electric circuit. And every single time, without fail, that the global electric circuit gets activated, we see an enormous amount of geomagnetic activity. Particularly, what we end up seeing are earthquakes and volcanoes. And just this year alone, as a result of the high X-class solar flares and insane coronal mass ejections that have been reaching us, we've seen a lot of volcanic activity and a lot of earth tremors that have been happening, such to the degree that pretty much worldwide, with the way that the volcanoes have been dispersed this year, we're going to have very, very cold, very, very rainy, possibly very icy weather next year. Crops may fail if you don't have a greenhouse or other things like that, just on account of all of the dust that is settling through the atmosphere. Of course, moisture systems collect and utilize that dust for cloud system. So yeah, it could be kind of strange, but all these things are going to be somewhat unprecedented. We don't really know what to expect, but we know things that are definitely possible based on models and based on science and just our understanding of biochemistry and bioelectricity at the present moment as well.
Yeah, and we think the jet stream. I mean, it has moved and it's moving, and we know through history that it has moved before. So the jet stream, like in a human lifetime, doesn't move very much. But when you start getting into the grand solar, minimum like we are right now, the weakened magnetosphere and such, now the jet stream is moving a little bit. At a rate that a human will perceive.
Yeah.
And so we have evidence, I think, things like that we know, okay, we're in it. This process is there. I mean, like in astrology, oftentimes when you feel something the most is when it's in transit. Like
Totally.
that's when we feel, oh my gosh, the moon is between houses. Oh, I feel it. So I think that we're in that transit period as we move into this new, I'm gonna call it an age, and that's something that I'm seeing is where something you had mentioned is, oh, and just real quick, I'll mention, I'll put some links in the show notes. There are some sites that YouTubes that really do follow the space weather really well if one is interested. I'll put some links in there. You can watch the KP index on your, computer or phone,
Yeah.
and also there's a great app for the Schumann resonance, which actually then also shows even more info on what the space weather is doing, which most of which I don't understand, but I know when it's normal and I know when it's all high.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I wish I understood some of that stuff. I'm like, wow, there's a lot to it, but so you can watch it. One of the things I think people will find is that you'll feel it if you start to watch the space weather. I mean, don't become a hypochondriac, but at the
Yeah.
same time, when the Schumann resonance is like just off the charts, oftentimes, we'll feel it and go, I think the Schumann's kind of up today, and you look and go, oh, there it is, So, with this grand solar minimum, one of the things that happens, from a new agey perspective, I'll say a new agey perspective, people call them like the light codes. We call them a lot of things like that that are coming to people. And there's some books by a guy named Sacha Dobler, who talks about this is a time of, disaster, but also real big, new science, technology, new leaps in consciousness. Gosh, I forget the guy's name who wrote it, but he wrote, grand solar minimums and evolutionary leaps. So it does seem like when I mentioned being in a static between ages, it seems like we're in that static between ages because before this event happens, we're getting like one way or the other, we're getting supercharged. And that's definitely something that we're all living with, and you can't really get away from it. I mean, if you're on the planet, you're getting a lot more space weather than you used to. And do you think that that might have, I mean, I know it's a little out there, but that's what we do. Do you think that kind of has the propensity to cause an effect positively in maybe like collective human consciousness, or for those who are connected, who are open to it, at least for the individuals that are tuned in, that walk around barefoot and and take spagyrics?
Yeah. Hey, good plug.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do, or at least I think that it's a very strong possibility. And the reason is really this: when we talk about increasing solar energy, when we talk about increasing the intensity of radiation, if we were to describe that by any other term, we'd literally, especially by like more common new age terminology, we'd say, well, that's increasing the vibration. And people have been talking about like heightening the vibration or increasing the vibration for a really long time now, even enhancing their own vibration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So literally we have something physically that's going on that is doing that. And then we have metaphysical individuals or metaphysically inclined individuals that are saying very much so the similar things. Is consciousness moving faster? I think so. Like, for instance, if we take a look at the rate of learning 10 years ago versus the rate of learning now, it is really, really kind of strange because people are taking in so much information so quickly through this type of action on their phones. You scroll,
Yes.
scroll, scroll, they're taking it in, taking it in, taking it in. Two things are happening with that. One, people are having a much harder time actually paying attention for any length of time because they're so used to information moving so fast that sometimes even watching movies and whatever else at a
Yes.
normal speed is like, oh, it's dragging on forever. And so they'll stop paying attention at a certain point. It just loses their attention because they're used to, light speed data. So we can take in a whole lot more information a whole lot more quickly, and we're even updating the ways that we are accustomed to doing that. One of the ways that we are accustomed to taking in data, of course, is by really learning and moving slow and reading words and forming ideas. A lot of that is kind of going out the window right now, and we're trying to ascertain everything that there is to know from images right now. Images are king right now for the low attention span that has been driven and possibly even manufactured by the advent of social media and its popularity. So if you cannot quickly ascertain everything that it is that you need to know from a quick image, infographic, etc., it oftentimes takes way too long and people are just continuing to move on, move on, move on. Now, that's a general rule of thumb for the general populace. There's still folks like me who are like, hey, I don't want any of the social media nonsense. I'd much rather back off and spend some time reading a book. But that's not where the majority of people's attention are going. So consciousness, you could say, is increasing. The rate and the speed of personal evolution could also be said to be increasing. And in fact, just evolution, the way that evolution happens from a more scientific or a philosophically scientific perspective is based on adaptation to external stimuli. So if something is changing in one's ambient environment, you have a choice. One, either adapt and therefore evolve, or don't adapt and therefore perish. And essentially, this is kind of what we're seeing right now, is that some things are dying, whether those be cultural norms, whether those be traditions, whether those be traditional states of learning or whatever, or whether it's actual beings, like how many over the past like 50 to 100 years, how many of the different species that have been on this planet have actually just died. Now, a lot of that definitely has some human involvement along with it, but it's not entirely human driven in a lot of cases. So with that being said, there are a lot of things that cannot adapt to the external stimuli that they're given. And again, in cases of toxicity, humans are making an enormously toxic thing. In fact, I was just reading a book last night that was talking about radioactive fallout from nuclear types of development in comparison to the nuclear electronic charge fallout that's happening just from chemical agriculture. And what a lot of people don't realize is that ions make up absolutely everything, whether ions are positively charged or negatively charged. Okay, and this really gets into the concept of frequency and the concept of vibration, concept of metaphysics and physics alike. They really meet here and they converge in this spot. But the idea is that all of these positively or negatively charged ions are being developed for commercial agriculture, and the more that we put in these chemical salts with these strange ionic charges, the more that it's actually stripping an ionic salt away from topsoil or an ionic charge away from topsoil, and it's actually creating infinitely more radioactive, because that's what we're talking about, is like separating electrons, radioactive damage in the soil than like about 650,000 Hiroshimas going off. And it's happening every single day that we're using chemical fertilizers. The amount of ionic displacement is huge. Now, if that were to happen with, a huge explosion, everybody would notice, because it's a huge explosion. There's fire and there's heat and all these other things, and they're not paying attention to what's also going on underneath the soil and why the soil is in such a terrible and bad shape as it presently is. So yeah, at any rate, all of this to say that I do think that consciousness is shifting. For better or for worse remains yet to be seen, but consciousness is shifting. And one of the ideas that I had, which I think still remains very poignant for me, is when we talk about a shift to a fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional framework, how does that happen? Because we talk about being outside of time and space once we get into at least the fourth dimension, and particularly with the fifth dimension, the way that it's talked about in modern metaphysics, you're very far outside of the concepts of time and space. So what happens if there's a huge global disaster where everybody who is living instantaneously dies and doesn't have time to process that? Does that actually create a shared experience of an afterlife with thousands of people who are technically like ghosts that are able to move around in non-physical, without, physical restrictions, the way that we're physically moving around? And is that the shift between the third dimension and the fourth dimension? Is that the technical mechanism that makes it happen? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that I can pick up with my tri-field meter and other sensitive EMF equipment. I can pick up disembodied entities and spirits and other things like that have died very traumatically without knowing about it. And so if that happens to an entire planet simultaneously, do those exist in their own isolated dimension? Does life continue on? Do we not even recognize that we're dead? We just have fewer limitations? What does that look like? I really don't know. But they are ideas that that I've entertained and that I've definitely thought about and meditated upon a little bit.
Yeah, it reminds me of Neville Goddard. He was kind of a new thought person back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, died in like 72. And he definitely had some amazing spiritual experiences. He had quite the consciousness, and someone I've studied for decades at this point. And he used to talk about death being where basically you just, this was his take on it, is where you would die. Like he says, you were born once as a baby, but then you would just, when you would die, you would just basically be about 20 again. in another incarnation, and you wouldn't know that those transitions were happening until you got spiritually evolved enough in consciousness, and then you would know that it was happening, and you would see people walking around, and you would see them in the perspective of several timelines at once, you know. And he would say to people, "Oh, you died yesterday," and they'd be like, "What?" And he says, "Yeah, you know, but you're here now. That was a different timeline." And so really trippy. And there's something about that. It's one of those things where my linear mind, I can't explain it, but you know, there's something in me that goes, "I think so." So in a way, if you were to wipe out an age and move into a new one, that would be everybody suddenly becoming again, continuing, you
Yeah.
know. And you know, it's just going to be those who are able to wow, you talk about it, you know, many people have had like cataclysmic dreams, visions, deja vu, and you start thinking, wow, well, was that just the other second? You
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, when we look at the Grand Canyon, you know, there's and I think oh, I forget his name, Ben Davidson, I think he covers this in some of his he has a bunch of like a playlist that gets into the idea of what he's talking about. So if one ever wants to watch it, he'll really fill you in. It'll take hours to watch it, and it's really enlightening. But that the Grand Canyon is a great big plasma arc. You know, the Grand
Yeah.
Canyon's actually a mega lightning strike. So when you look at the power of that transition, um, if we did get taken out, like in a solar event, if the sun goes, if that happens, we get taken out in like, what do they call it? Like the solar flash, or, you know, a great big,
Yeah.
you know, CME, whatever, that would ultimately, if everyone goes out at once, you're going to go out in a supercharged state. You're going to go out within a lightning bolt, you
Precisely.
know?
I mean, talk about high frequency, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
so that's going to definitely, one way or the other, be spectacular for an instant, or you know, it's really you're gonna go out on a high note, to put it lightly.
yeah, exactly,
You know.
exactly. And so, yeah, you know, I think about these things, you know, pretty regularly. That was part of the impetus too
Mhm.
for coming out here and living off grid. It's just always been one of my goals to just get off and go and do this. And there was a point that was I think last April of April of 2024, where we were in this big eclipse window between a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse, or vice versa, and it lasted about 2 weeks as per usual. And I just looked at my wife and I said, you know, I don't know how much longer we're actually going to have. I've been tracking space weather now for, over 15 years, and it's getting more and more intense. We're having far more X-class solar flares and more regularly. And then the geomagnetic storms that we're having that follow these events are getting, greater and greater and greater and greater, and longer and longer and more intense. And most of us have been able to see that over the past 2-3 years, at relatively low latitudes. We're able to see, the northern lights, or aurora
Mhm.
borealis, and things like that. That's all a result of that geomagnetic activity, solar geomagnetic activity. And so it's very, very fascinating to me. And I told her, I said, I don't know how much longer we're going to have. It could be as little as 2 years, and it could be as many as 25 or so. But I would really rather live the rest of my days, whatever amount of time that I have, on my own terms, instead of just trying to slave away and get something done, because I don't have a whole lot of confidence that any of what we do is going to make much difference in the long run right now anyway. Of course, we have to, until things get bad enough where the electric grid goes down or other things like that happen, people have to do what they have to do in order to get by and survive and, live. And like, for 95, 99% of people, you still have to go to the grocery store and go buy your food, and you still have to rely on the farmers, and you still have to like live in your house, and you still have to pay for your house and do. So you got to do something for for your days until there's a cataclysmic event. But at that cataclysmic event, for most of my life, I've been working really hard so that I'd be able to pass on the system of medicine that I've been creating to somebody. I have a lot of uncertainty of the fact that there's even going to be a somebody to be able to pass that on to. I don't think that there's maybe going to be that many folks, or at least I think that that's a very strong possibility. So I keep working towards it because it's passionate. It's like obviously what I'm meant to be doing here, and I don't know what else I would be doing anyway. So I keep putting my time and effort towards it. But I can't, with any sense of certainty, say that it's going to be around for that long for people to be able to pick up the pieces and really do much. We just have to try and find purpose and meaning on the day-to-day level and try and do what it is that we're here to do, whether that's, you know, healing ourselves or learning the lessons that we're here to learn, or, you know, doing the daily things that that you're meant to be doing, or whatever the case is. It could be as grandiose or as mundane as the individual assigns the importance of their own life. But I still think that that's a very strong influence that I've had for a couple of years now. We just decided last year, because we bought this place, you know, in 2022, and it was like, I don't know if we'll ever be able to make it out. And then, you know, it was April of 2024 where I said, you know what, let's just do it. Let's just do it. If we don't, I don't know that we're going to get much of an opportunity. There's never a good time to make huge life decisions that are going to, you know, cause some sort of collapse around you. That's the entire basis of transformation anyway, is that transformation begins with crisis. So I'd rather manufacture a small crisis and go through the transformations that I want, rather than just continually putting it off and seeing what happens, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there is no greater way to speed up your evolution than do something which most people would say is stupid.
Yeah, there you go.
And you're like, no, I just don't like wasting time. Let's get to it, because now I got nothing to do except what's next. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am sensing a real do it. It's time to do it. Like, do it, the thing you do, because it's the thing you do. And like the Zen, you know, master would say, what do you need a future for? You know?
Yeah.
And so really it's living one's life every day, where if they were to transition that moment, they'd have no regret, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, to live every day as close to perfectly align with your mission, your calling. And those callings change over a lifetime, but your calling to experience life, to you know, whatever that is for each individual. I'm not sure if many people can really even do that, but for those that can, that really is an impetus that I'm seeing with many people at this time, where, you know, take that bold step, just do it, because whatever system you might be wanting to or hoping to sustain you at this time won't be there very much longer anyway. So why not just get a head start?
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Get a head start and do the things that you've always wanted to do. I mean, you know, if you want to get out and travel the world, there's probably not much more time to do it. Just go do it. You know?
Yeah, it's so true. And you know, when you talk about going out with a higher octave, with a bang, with a flash, oh, what is the we often see it in hieroglyphics, and I forget. Oh, the guy's got a name, Squatter Man. Yeah, Squatter Man. I was just drawing it so I remember. Squatter Man, you know? And so, but like, isn't Squatter Man sort of, doesn't that look like kind of a person, you know, going out in a plasma storm? So I think that'll be my position. I'll be like, oh.
Yeah, well, I mean, seriously, I mean, it's going to be the same for us all. You won't know what to do, and before you even think about what to do, boom, plasma storms are upon us. So, or at least, you know, the likelihood of that or something like that seems very, very high, very common. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. But I'm 100% there with you, Craig. Is like, if ever there was a time to really focus on the things that are going to bring personal and social satisfaction and fulfillment, I think that now is a really great time. And, you know, when we look back at history, there's like every time period, you know, there's always people that are like, it's the end of times and it's a blah, blah, blah. So whether or not what we have going on right now is actually going to be, you know, a complete cataclysmic event, or lead to a series of crazy cataclysmic events or not still remains to be seen. It's just that if I were a betting man, I would say probably so. And the science that I've been looking at also seems to indicate probably so. And yeah, that's why I would say just like do the things that bring you the most joy right now. Spend the most time savoring your family, your friends, your loved ones. Delight in the experience of being human in this particular way right now. It's always, we always live every day that it could just be taken away that fast. That's one
Yeah.
of our biggest takeaways of people that, get in a tragic accident or whatever else. Anyway, we always say, oh, we need that reminder sometimes to come back to like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. But if we can wake up every morning and remind ourselves that this day is an extraordinary gift and how can we capitalize on it the very most that we can, I think that we'll see much happier people, much healthier people, and we'll at least be taking advantage of whatever time we might still have. Whether that's 600 years or whether that's 600 seconds, we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And, converting or transmuting I have to, I have to I want to. I think when you really get to that point where most of your life is I want to, I mean, that's it. I am doing what I want to do. That's you've arrived. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in a different podcast, and this is just something, and I want to move on to some, of your work. I don't want to, but this is all. I think this is all very, very relevant because I think this is something that a lot of people that we're interviewing now. We're kind of getting the show ramped up again, and I have interviews every week now, which is really great. But it does seem like a lot of people are, feeling what we've just been talking about. They feel something is off, something is odd. They feel charged. They feel uneasy. So in a sense, just talking about these energies and this, is I think very useful. So 15% less people. You had a feeling there might be like 15% less people on the planet at this point. And, I've even heard that some of the immigration that we have, which is controlled and uncontrolled, might be a way of covering that up, I have heard, which I thought was kind of interesting. And and I also noticed that like everyone is dying. Like, of course, we can look at humanity. And if anybody wants to do a fun experiment, which just, maybe have a glass of red wine with you because you might need it. But if you, when you're on your phone or on your computer, hopefully EMF, ground it and protect it.
Yeah.
If you search like images.google.com and you search like 50s beach photos, 60s beach photos, 70s beach photos, you'll be like, yeah, 80s beach photos. People are kind of chubby, although I like the hair. Then 90s, you'd be like, oh my, 2000s, 2015, 2025. It is obvious that we're dying.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah, exactly. It's
So,
like,
yeah, there's 15% less people and we're dying. So what's going on? Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, inside of the framework of Aurelian medicine, there's a number of things. One of those is the way you treat the earth essentially equivocates to the way that you treat yourself. And we could say this just with the general axiom that I grew up with, which was what goes around comes around.
Yes.
But you can't constantly try to ionically, trick plants into growing and producing nutrient-rich food before the soil itself starts to degrade massively. And when you have soil, the ecosystems are really amazing. I mean, if you cut a plant, you throw it on the ground, it's going to start decomposing and it will contribute to humus restoration relatively quickly. But if you continue to add in these very toxic inputs, then the soil is just going to completely degrade in a number of years. And we've seen that. And all of the work of Dr. Zach Bush also, he and I see eye to eye when it comes to our agricultural systems and how long our current earth will be able to actually support the vast majority of life based on the areas that are free and able to be farmed and where food is coming from, and when we're going to hit what is called total lockout. Lockout is where the soil has such poor ionic health that it literally, with inputs or without inputs, can no longer produce food. So it just can't grow life or sustain life in it, because everything comes down to an electromagnetic kind of perspective. And eventually you will hit lockout. And people who have ever grown cannabis, especially in like a hydroponic type of area where they're adding nutrients in all the time, they know that that's a common thing that happens, that you hit lockout at a certain point. Then you have to change out your entire water and flush all of that toxic water away and fill up more water and redo the whole thing. So the same thing happens with soil systems, and that's a bad deal. So on one, and then here's the other thing about the food is that even if the soil did have healthy nutrients, our system of food distribution is so askew from the principles of nature and of health that they get harvested weeks early and then sprayed with chemicals so that they can ripen up on the grocery store shelves. And during the immense transit times, some of our produce actually coming from China and overseas, and other produce coming from, most of the produce coming from Mexico and South America, in order for it to be ripe by the time you got it, it had to be harvested about 2 weeks prior to that, and then transported up here, make it to the distribution, then transported from distribution to individual centers, and then from those centers into the stores that you're shopping at. And that entire time they're using a new, usually a cocktail of different chemicals, depending on the produce, in order to help that produce ripen. So you had underripe produce, which means that it does not actually have the nutrition in the first place. Even if the soil was really amazing, the best biodynamic soil, had tons of microorganisms, whatever else, you're still harvesting it so early that that material couldn't ever take on all of the nutrients that it should have were it left on the vine and then distributed locally. Instead, it gets harvested very early. And then, so, all of the produce that we're eating, massively deficient. And the same thing happens largely with a lot of our meat animals and ruminants and other things, especially like, let's talk about pigs. Pigs oftentimes eat the slop of whatever is not eaten at the kitchen table. Well, sometimes that's true for commercial pig farms, and usually they're just feeding them on total garbage type of thing. And so we don't even have people like, in the medieval era, for instance, it was really common for swine herds to go out and allow their pigs to graze fields. First, you'd let your geese through, and then you'd go ahead and let your sheep through, and then you'd let the cattle through, and then you'd let the pigs through. And the reason, after any particular harvest, especially after, say, like a grain harvest, the reason is the ducks will take up all of the grains that fell down that weren't, stuck on the thing that went to the thresher, and they would fall down in the ducks, and then you'd get duck manure, on that whole area. Then you'd get the sheep, and the sheep would come through, and they would graze things down really, really low. Sometimes you'd let your cattle come in first. It just depends. Because cattle don't graze things down as far as sheep do. Sheep will eat things straight to the roots. But then finally you let the pigs come through, and the pigs actually will root up those roots and eat those roots. Now you have numerous different types of hooves and of material and of biomass, particularly from their waste, that is inoculating the soil with yet more microbes, and you get rid of pretty much all of that material, and it helps to ensure the fertility of the soil. And then, of course, in the fall, you let pigs go in, and they'll eat up all the acorns that are falling off of trees, and all of the, the bad nuts that you don't really want that have fallen down, and all these other things. You make use of the robust digestive capacity of the swine to be able to perform ecological functions, ecological cleanup. We don't do that anymore, which means that we don't have that type of nutrition available in the meats that we're eating as well. Even when we talk about grass-fed, grass-finished beef and blah, 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 what is the wellness of the soil to begin with? How much topsoil is actually being created there? And how renewable is all of that soil? Just because something is certified grass-fed or grass-finished does not indicate the nutrient density of that grass, or whether grasses should have even been growing in that particular area or not, based on its bioregion and its capacity and its native life cycles. So, we are constantly talking about all of these things. So the foods that we're eating, though, all of this to say, Craig, the foods that we're eating just are nowhere near as nutrient dense as they need to be unless you are making them yourself and have had 3 to 5 years already of conditioning the soil, growing the soil, building up the humus, increasing the mineralization, the fertilization of the soil, replenishing the easily lost magnesium content to the soil being a big one, and things like that. So people are eating, but they're eating these empty calories, and it's contributing massively to world hunger, because the more you eat, actually, the more hungry you end up being, because you're still not getting the proper nutrition that you need. And so people are typically quite overweight, quite unhealthy. You couple that with the fact that they're being stressed on a biofield level as well as on their cellular level with EMFs, being bombarded by it, working under fluorescent lights, and all of the other things that just completely destroy the hormonal health of the individual. And you keep compounding all of the different toxicities, the gut brain disorders that are happening, the gut axis just issues that are happening with glyphosate and the other chemical sprays that are going on. And there's very, 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 very little chance for an individual to actually achieve any measure of health. And we can see this. I mean, go back 100 years ago, 1925.
Yes.
Read a book from somebody that wrote in 1925. Just notice the vocabulary that they use, and notice the length of sentences too. The sentence might be, what we would consider to be the equivalent of 2, 3, 4 sentences long in our sentences today. And they would just separate the ideas with commas, and they could keep 4, 5, 6 ideas all in one sentence very, very clearly. And obviously they wouldn't have written that way unless audiences could also read that way, So the intelligence from even just 100 years ago until today has massively, massively declined in terms of the capacity for the human brain to pick up on various ideas and to separate out numerous ideas and to be able to put them all together in context and move fluidly from one of those long run-on thoughts to the other. We don't have that capacity so much anymore, or it's massively being dwindled. And if you go back to the 1800s, 1825, and you read a book from there that was written in English, you'd scarce be able to understand it, I think, because it gets even more intense. There's sometimes 20 or 30 thoughts that can be expressed in a single sentence. And the idea of sentences oftentimes becomes much more akin to multiple paragraphs that we're utilizing in the modern age. And we're constantly making things simpler in the modern age and bite-sized. But we're not doing that because it makes it more digestible. We're doing it because we've lost a lot of intelligence. All of the xenotoxins have contributed to some level of mental retardation that is just not being spoken about. And of course, the huge uptick of people like myself that were born with diagnoses that are now being called neurodivergent, whether that's attention deficit disorder or autism spectrum disorder or other things like this. I mean, really all that is, it's poor nutrition coupled with toxins that create horrible environments for individuals and their development. It affects the cell, which affects the DNA, which affects the entire organism. So yeah, I don't think that there's much chance for most people to be healthy these days unless they have an inordinate amount of money to put into getting all of the toxins out of their system and then utilizing all of their money that they possibly can in establishing healthy methods of agriculture year round that they can eat from using highly sustainable and regenerative methods. And it's beyond just the buzzwords of sustainability and regenerative and whatever else. It's about renutrientizing everything and being able to ensure that there are proper nutrients and proper life cycles going into the plants and other things like that. So yeah, it's a very difficult thing. And these days I'm extremely selective even about who I choose to work with, because one, I don't have too much extra time to be working with health clients. And when I do, one of my screening questions these days is, are you using modern medicine, really allopathic medicine, in any real capacity? And if the answer is like yes, like I go and see my doctor once a year, it's like, okay, then you should probably just continue to see that doctor. I'm interested in people who are still, after all of these years of seeing the allopathic medicine system completely fail and make things worse. I don't want to have to undo all of that damage, and I don't want all of the liability of all of their pharmaceutical medications or their approach or anything really getting in between the health of the client that I'm working with and not, because it's a very, very intensive program. People have to be put on regular selective binders. They have to use very expensive chelated minerals with amino acids in order to restore their mineral balance. I mean, I have yet to see a single good hair tissue mineral analysis come back from a client that shows that they have really good, healthy mineralization. And this can be from young children to, people in their 20s and 30s. I mean, they're just completely degraded and deficient. And to get somebody who is so young from those deficient levels up to where they need to be is 6 months to 2 years of time working on that, just to try and undo the damage that's been done. And so much that needs to be unlearned from modern allopathy and modern science and what they have said is healthy and how to live and all these other things. Those have nothing to do with the perennial principles of health and wellness. And unfortunately, the perennial systems of health and wellness, like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, have been laughed at and scoffed at. Even in China, laughed at and scoffed at. And in India too. And they have tried to adopt the more Western and allopathic systems. So it's a real hard thing. And where I'm at is like, I can make an impact in certain people's lives. I almost, I have a colleague, his name is Kenneth Profruck, Dr. Kenneth Profruck. He's an amazing, amazing man. Anybody who's ever seen him present or talk or has had the privilege of working with him as a client is amazing. But he pretty much only chooses to work on children because he said there's no chance in saving the adults.
Oh, wow.
So, and I kind of feel after 20 years of clinical practice, I pretty much feel very much so the same way these days. And, I know that it seems like I maybe have been harping on what is going wrong with the world right now, but these have been the questions that have been coming to me. And I'm just one of those guys where I shoot straight from the hip. I'm not going to try to go to anything. And realistically, it's a bad situation. People can get healthy, they can do it, but it takes an enormous amount of energy. And if you don't have a 6-figure income, forget it. Like, not even a possibility. Just the supplements and the coaching alone is going to take probably close to 13, 14 grand a year in order for a standard person just to purchase just the supplements and then maybe a little supplemental coaching to tell them how to take those things. It's no longer a thing of like, oh, you're a little deficient in this mineral, let's take this. It's not like that anymore. We're talking about systemic tissue, organ, and cellular deficiencies coupled with enormous amounts of intracellular and intratissue and organ-based toxins. So kind of crazy.
No, and the thing is, you can see it. I mean, it's not like it's not a theory. I mean, one can simply, walk around and see. I mean, it's one of the things that I notice, and is that everyone's got a limp. Everybody, it's hard to get from the car to the grocery store or whatever. I mean, so you can see the sickness. And so I get it. For many, and I haven't had that exact I could say sentiment or agreement with what you're saying, and that, for many it's just too late. Like just live YOLO, live your best life, whatever, because
Yep,
there's
exactly.
really not much that could be done. It would be expensive, and of course also you'd have to have the will to do it, and that has to be there first. And I would say most really don't have the will, especially when I do have that belief that we're in between ages, we're in that static. And as Oli Demigard mentioned, he said it's like there's a train station. Most of the train station, this one train is kind of heading off, and that's where you're at. And he was saying, in 2012 that started, 2015 it was a little far away, but now it's just out of reach. So either you are back at the train station, I'll call it 3D, or you're on the 4D train.
Yep,
And
exactly.
and it's just like that's just the way it is. And it's so, you know, well, when you mentioned books, one of my favorite books is just as far as novels, reading, is Last of the Mohicans. And I know it
Yep.
was written in 18 something. I forget what year it was, but that, from what I understood, was just common like grade school reading back then. I mean, school was different back then, of course, so the grades and such, but that was, young adult kid reading. And I read it and I go, I love this thing. I mean, I have to like, it slows you down. You're like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
undoubtedly.
and you go, whoa. And it is humbling that used to be, a children's book. And you're like,
Well, and you have to remember in the 1870s, like a lot of kids didn't even complete fifth or sixth grade, and they still were reading at that level to be able to, as adults, read that type of literature and understand it. And again, for like modern audiences, it's like, whew, okay, a lot of ideas in a sentence here.
oh, I know. It makes sentences become something beautiful. I mean, even a really easy one is like if one like read the Constitution like as it's written, and you look
Yes.
at the penmanship, and you
Yep.
look at that and you go, wow. So it does seem like we all should be, to the extent that we can. I mean, there's always an ideal, and most people are moving towards that. Like we're like, here at the Radiant Creators headquarters, we're moving towards our ideal. We've met a lot of it, but we're not as far as we want to go. It's just this course that you're on, and you keep going that way. So we're
That's right.
working on having our more rural greenhouse, living in that way. But I've been a farmer before. I've been an organic farmer, and many of the things that you were mentioning, I long for again, because to live with the seasons, to live with the land, to grow your own food, to have your own chickens, it's the best. You can't beat it. I'll take that over, an expensive condo and a Ferrari any day. And so like, but it seems that, within wherever we're at, it does seem that if you've got the land, then growing on the land is always great. And of course, there's a whole yearly, throughout the year process. Like one of my favorite things is
Right.
in the winter, the cold frames. I love cold frames in the winter. That's the best thing.
Yep.
And if you go to the east and see the old colonial homes, you'll see hand blown glass and old cold frames from back in the day, like they knew. And so what could people be growing? Like if you are, let's say, a city dweller, like you don't have land that you can till, or even if you do, it seems like hydroponics are, if managed correctly, at least a way to get very nutrient dense greens, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially greens and herbs and things like that can grow really well in those systems. Now, the term hydroponic uh, indicates that just something is being grown inside of water. What I would like people to understand is that in order for anything to really have nutrient density or value to it, there has to be life inside of the water. You can't just be giving nutrients to the water, which is what most hydroponic farmers do. And if you do that, that's fine. Your plants will survive just like you were surviving this cataclysm, but you're not going to be healthy. You're not going to be radiant. You're not going to have all of the faculties to you that you would otherwise have if essentially you're surviving but you're not thriving, type of thing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I invite people to look into the idea of what's called bioponics. And
Mm.
bioponics essentially grows things inside of the system itself or right around the system itself that then can be chopped back and put into kind of like mesh bags or some terry cloth or whatever, and put submerged under the level of the water that actually end up fermenting and decomposing and producing your own nutrients and your own organic fertilizer inside of the water. And that's called bioponics. I started with bioponics with fish. So it's slightly aquaponic style,
Yeah.
but also putting in those inputs from things that I was growing. But you can do bioponics without fish as well. So that's really one of the things that's really quite inexpensive and very easy to do. I buy a couple of vinyl fence posts. You know, they're like 3x3 or 4x4 vinyl fence posts. I grab a skill saw and just kind of saw down one face of it so that I have like a little strip down one face of that post, and then use some aquatic pond filter media. Basically, it is kind of like this plasticky mesh type of thing, and you can create your own zip grow towers. And if you have more money than you do time, then you just go to zip grow as a company, and then you can buy zip grow towers from them too. But then you can put 3 or 4 zip grow towers right above a standard 5 to 7 gallon fish tank. And so it takes up about the square footage of, you know, a standard tabletop fish tank, but then you can grow 20 to 30 different plants there. You can always have your salad greens. You can always have other things. And the way I like to do it is create floating seed starting trays as well. They float on a styrofoam type of deal. And then there are these little kind of cocoa coir plug things that you can just drop your seeds in. They soak up the water. They automatically sprout. They start to root. And then you can put them into that pond media, grow a few things, chop back those things, stick them in a bag, stick that in the tank, and just allow the nutrients to recirculate and keep doing that. Those types of systems are definitely available to people. They are able to bring food to otherwise huge food deserts all over the country, and to get some better nutrition in, because most people don't realize this about greens. First of all, lettuces and most greens and most salads are not really what most perennial traditions would consider to be nutrient dense or healthy foods anyway. Oftentimes they have biocharacteristics that are incompatible with the season, that disrupt the digestibility of other foods. You should never eat raw food with cooked foods anyway, and things, other different types of things like that, because the body cannot produce enough enzymes to really break all those things down. There's like, you know, an acidity component to it, you know, or a pH component to it. There's an enzyme production component to it. There's like all sorts of things. This is where the science of Ayurvedic food combinations really comes down. But with that being said, most people who do eat greens and do eat lettuces and do eat, you know, things like that, salads and whatever else, they don't realize that if that plant is more than maybe a half an hour out of the ground after being cut from the stem, that all of the latex sap that's inside of there actually dries out, and there's really no benefit to eating it in the first place. Lettuces don't have much nutrition to them. Doesn't matter what type of lettuce it is. You might get some anthocyanins if you see some red colors, or if you get blue colors, same types of things. You might have some sort of medicinal based pigment in there. But for the most part, you don't have a whole lot of minerals. You don't have a whole lot of nutrients that are in there. So that's not what you're doing it for. You're doing it because of that latex, which is able to stimulate stomach acid and increase your digestive fire, and also to increase bile production and bile dumping, and help to eliminate toxins from the body by stimulating the liver. And especially in the case of lettuces, if it didn't come from your farm or from the fresh cut thing where it's oozing latex at the time of harvesting, and within 15 minutes on the table, you really aren't even getting that benefit from it. It's just empty calories, and the more empty calories that you eat, the worse it is for you, you know? So, yeah, there's like little things like that people can do where they can supplement their diet even without making dietary changes or big lifestyle changes to do these things. And almost everybody can find a window or a balcony or a couple of things where they wouldn't even need to use grow lights during the main growing season to pot a few plants and put them in there. You may want, you know, smaller varieties of tomatoes, you know, maybe just like a small cherry tomato plant or something, keep it heavily pruned and whatever else, make as much room as you can. But yeah, all of these things are definitely available. And I spent, probably the first 12 years of my career showing people side by side with alchemy. Here is how to be able to grow all of the things that you need in order to make the medicines and the foods that you need in order to heal yourself. And I still am very, very, very passionate about that work, but there's only so long that you can beat the
Yes.
same drum with the same song before it's like, okay, is anybody really listening? Is
Yeah.
it's really taking off? Because if I'm just wasting my breath, I'd really rather put my attention and effort to where it's going to make the biggest impact.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah. And it can become very addicting if you have the greens growing in your home.
Oh yeah,
Then you can just go snip, eat, or pluck and eat. I mean,
so good.
some of our favorite things around here are sunflower sprouts.
Yeah,
Boom. Which I do like to just take the trays and put either they call it like rock carpet or whatever it is. I forget the word for it. Or
yeah,
rock wool. Yeah, put that down. Perfect. 30 seeds in there. Put some nice goodies in there, some water,
yeah,
and then you can just walk by and just mow the lawn, just and
exactly.
I mean, and that's and then you're getting all the good stuff, and mustard greens are a favorite along those lines. I mean, oh, mustard greens are great. You can, for one moment, you will see the entirety of the universe while your nose is burning. It's so wonderful. It's just
That's very
awesome.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
mustard greens.
and
Ooh, they're enlightening. Don't cheat yourself if you're not doing it. Well, along with writing, another one you can see is music. Me being kind of a musician. Kind of a musician, I guess you could say, or a musician. There's just no way around it. I know that generations always look at the new generation and say, "Oh, that's not
that's
music."
sound.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what they're. But no. If you actually scientifically look at this, music is crap, and it's not good for people's minds. And I do think that when you look at organic rhythms, acoustic recordings, vacuum tubes, I mean, basically, when you look at, uh, like for instance, listen to a Led Zeppelin song on
yeah,
a record, everything there was recorded onto tape through an instrument. And there may have been some synthesizers here and there, but even then they were, as I say, Moog, they were vacuum tubes, so you have this organic life, this organic sine wave in an organic, well, a record's not organic, but the grooves are organic ultimately.
yes,
And so you're hearing this, you actually are experiencing that recording studio, you're experiencing the energy of those musicians, and it does something to you, which is positive. It's a
yeah,
positive cymatic. It can really, wow, take you somewhere. But when the rhythm is completely synthetic, it's all basically made in GarageBand.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
yeah, it's what it is. It's what it is. It's like, and then all the music, we always tweak microphones because it helps a person's voice sound better. There's reasons, like different music. So it's an art there. You do manipulate voice a little bit, but there's a huge difference between that and complete auto tune,
yeah.
enveloping reverb. You're like, this is garbage, And
So
so yeah, and that is hurting the soul of the people who listen to it, So
well, and when
yeah,
you say that, I mean, I do not want to skip over that without emphasizing and underlining and
yes.
underscoring that and bolding that and italicizing it as much as I possibly can. If you go back to all of the Pythagorean wisdom,
Mm,
which says that music, astronomy, and geometry are the exact same science, just three different applications of the exact same science. And these are the things that feed the soul and make the soul what it is. Music is the thing that literally has the capacity to elevate the human soul and to elevate consciousness to insane levels of sophistication. And we have degraded the music, which I think is a very conscious thing by the music industry. The more that people are dumbed down, the more that you can just continue to sell them solutions. Um, and it doesn't matter what it is, but if you can dumb them down, you can sell more and more and more and more and more of something because people are less creative and less apt to be able to come up with their own solutions, and so they will just infinitely buy. You create a society of consumers. And all of the music that I have heard come out for probably like the last 15 years, with the exception of some very small bands that are oftentimes struggling to get record deals and whatever else, or they have to create their own independent label or whatever. They are awful. They are just awful, and everything is so poppy. They're using the exact same very highly predictable chords. The melodies are not interesting. You can tell exactly where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, look, the same four chords are used in literally every pop song that you can imagine for the last 25 to 30 years, no matter what, anyway. But what makes a truly interesting song is not just the chord or the chord changes, but the dynamism of the timing, the dynamism also of using, kind of interesting things like counterpoint melodies or harmonies, utilizing all sorts of, interesting melody lines that you would be like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't expect that to go that way. Or utilizing different types of scales or modes that you would not necessarily expect to hear either. These types of unexpected or unsuspecting aspects of music feed the creativity of the human soul and inspire it to do new things and interesting things. And when we just completely toss that aside and opt for, Ariana Grande or whatever else, and these basic, silly vocal trills that are mistaken for being good music, I think that we have lost the soul of mankind massively, and the music that we're listening to, by and large, as a planet now. When I heard about K-pop come out, I was just like, you got to be kidding me! Even Korea, huh?
Yeah.
Like, even Korea. Now, not to say that those tunes aren't catchy, not to say that you can't like those tunes. Okay, I'm not trying to shame anybody for whatever type of music that they like. What I am trying to say, though, is that listen to classical music for 2 to 3 days straight, and then listen to your K-pop thing or whatever it is that you're listening to, and just notice the difference in your mental responses. Notice the difference in your mental agility and acuity and your speed and all of these other things, and just make a decision. What feels better and most useful to you? And if the answer is, you know what, I don't mind being a tool and listening to this modern music, then have at it. There's a place for us all.
Yeah. And then, of course, you, along with that, add on, before you listen to the music, smoke some of the GMO Franken mutant weed that is on every, that really helps. It's that really enhances the negative effect, by the way.
Yeah.
And so you had mentioned, and it was a different podcast, and you mentioned that you'd noticed about 15% of the population seems to not be around, and this is something that, like, we're noticing here too, and it's accelerating. I mean, I'm like 55. I know I look young. It's hard to believe, but I'm 55.
Wow, you're doing good, man.
Yeah, they're doing good. It's all those it's that high Ormus soil.
Yeah, there you go.
And so at 55, one of the things about living for a little while is that you're going to know people that died, be they family, friends, neighbor, whatever. By the time, you're probably 20s, maybe by 30s, probably 40s, yes, 50s, yes, you're more and more likely to have known people that have died. So the thing is that ever since about, January, March 2020, I think around then, especially, seems to be an acceleration.
True.
And, we know so many people that have cancer, and it's not just slight, it's just extreme turbo, as they call it. This is turbo cancer, and then just people dying just for no reason, just quite literally, just they were alive and they just died, and like, what? I guess that happens, but it's to an extent now. In 55 years, I have never just had so many people that we know on the way out.
Yeah.
And so this 15% less people, is there like a time frame when that would have started? And how are this 15%, like, where did they go and how? Because I can kind of guess, but I really don't want to make any assumptions. Like,
Yeah.
there seems to be an acceleration, which ultimately is 15% less people than should have been here given normal death rates.
Yeah, now that statistic was actually given quite a while ago during that interview where I had mentioned that. I would say that we're probably closer to 18.5 to 20% of the population now. And unfortunately, here's the fact of the matter is I am watching even in our rural area. Now, people out here, almost all of the elders of our community are in their 80s, late 70s and 80s here, and they're still very active. They're still doing things day by day. They're, extremely sharp. They're making traditional, Appalachian style baskets. They're keeping full gardens. They're raising chickens and guinea hens. They're, doing, I mean, they're unreasonably active out here. But what I do end up seeing is that the younger folks, anywhere from 65 down to about 30, are just dropping off like flies. I mean, literally just in the time that we moved here since November here in our community, I think that there's been over 18 deaths, and we live in a tiny town of 130 people.
Wow.
So I want to put that in perspective. That's over 10% of the population that have died in like an 8-month period. That's a really important figure. That's a really important statistic. So when I say that I think the figure has gone up, I'm not just, pulling this out of nowhere. I'm literally observing my own environment and then also keeping up with population and census as best as we possibly can. Now, with that being said, I think it goes without saying that the most recent pharmaceutical solution that came out after COVID was probably the main. I'm trying to dance around the name.
Yeah.
You don't get censored here, but I would say that is a vast number of people that are dying specifically from that and that alone. That being said, for many other individuals, that's really just the icing on the cake.
Yes.
Because what we're looking at, I mean, go outside right now and look up in the sky and just see, are there any streaks across the sky where those planes went? Because if so, we have data now from individuals who have tested after rain all over the United States. We're seeing the same types of toxins over and over and over, which largely come down to aerosolized heavy metal particulate, along with graphene or graphite and a number of other different types of strange chemical combinations. There's only about 25 real major chemicals that are showing up coast to coast, and they're in virtually negligible levels in the water before the rain. Then it rains, and in super high concentrations that are way above EPA safe threshold levels. So that's a big thing. The chemical agriculture thing is a big thing. And what people don't realize is that there's this interesting relationship between glyphosate and heavy metals, especially with aluminum. The most amount of research has gone into aluminum, but aluminum actually binds to glyphosate, prevents it from breaking down even further, and it creates what's called aluminum glyphosate complex. It can also do this with cadmium, can do it with barium, with strontium, with lead, and with a number of other toxic heavy metals. And the interesting part about that is that glyphosate has an affinity for breaking through the blood-brain barrier. And so when there are heavy metals attached to it in these hard to destroy complexes, they also go through the blood-brain barrier and then lodge themselves into central nervous system tissue. When your nervous system shuts down or is not able to respond properly, then what ends up happening is that the body's natural defense mechanisms of response and signaling pathways decrease massively, because every organ is innervated. all of your tissues are innervated. And when there's neurological damage, not just in the brain, but through all the nerves of the body and the nerve cells, your body cannot actually even respond to the threats that are present. So we have that, and we have intracellular toxicity at rates that, I mean, are unfathomable right now. And through ways that I have yet to fully understand, I'm also seeing more and more clients that are showing what we'd refer to as pathogenic parasitic infections from things that were not even formerly conceived to be as human active. So like horse-based parasites, or parasites from strange animals, that it's like we've seen these types of things in zoonotic populations and in animals before, but we've never seen them in humans, and they weren't ever known to be a cause of disease. And now people have them, and they're hurting their livers, they're hurting their spleens, they're hurting, you know, all of their blood filtration organs. How/why are those suddenly inside of the system after 20 years of me viewing things are only there after maybe 3 or 4 years? So that's a big deal. So, you know, that's a thing. But the spike protein in particular is harmful and killing people at an alarming rate, because it's just creating coagulation of the blood and the destruction of the blood. And blood is where the life force of the system actually exists. And if it's coagulating and pooling up and going sour, then people are just going to die, you know, embolism, strokes, deep vein thrombosis, you know, heart attack, etc.
Yeah, when you mentioned looking up, an interesting thing to as an experiment, if you ever happen to be at a thrift store or wherever, and you find a pile of old BMX magazines, you know, the bicycles, BMX. Now its heyday is sort of gone, and I forget when it was really a big deal. But of course, they were always on the ramps, you know.
Yep.
And so they would often be taking pictures from the ground up while the person was in the air. And if you look at that era of BMX at its, you know, kind of high point, you won't see any streaks across the sky.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's the same thing for me as a skateboarder. And like, watch the X Games from 1990s, you know, when they started. You're not going to see any of that nonsense. Now you just go outside and you'll see it everywhere.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Bright and early in the morning. And then there it goes. And at night you see it, you know, so it's happening. Well, finally, if we spagyrics, you know, one thing is, everybody, you know, we go over a lot of material here, and it's definitely not hopeless. You know, we're all working on it. And if you're listening to this, then you're working on it. You're somewhere on the you know, love 4D train, and we're on our way. And you know, whatever making it means, I guess you're living your life. And there's that line in oh gosh, eternal something of, like, the eternal sunshine. I forget what it was. It was Jim Carrey and Kate.
Mind, yeah.
Yeah, the spotless mind. Yeah, Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet. And when they're laying on the ice, and he says, you know, if I was to die right now, I'd be fine with it. You know, and when he said that, you know, and you're watching that movie, you can feel it. You go, I understand that feeling. And so if you're always living in that place, or your compass is set to that direction, that's the direction that you're moving, then you're good. You know, you're on the 4D train. We're all going to get where we're going, you know. And I think that's maybe the key, is just, you know, like the American Indians said, and I don't know what tribe it was. It was actually specific. And people don't always get the whole quote. You know, it's that it's not just it's a good day to die, but it's a good day to live. It is a good day, you know. So live as if either way. Good day to live, good day to die. I'll be happy either way, you know.
Yep.
So it ain't hopeless. But so you do spagyrics, and actually a lot more. And I know it's always hard to give, you know, advice. We have to always be very, very careful when we talk about anything, of course. So it's not medical advice, everybody, just to make it easy, you know. So you have something that you're calling IDF, which to me, I sort of see it as scale, but I know it's something different, I think. But could you explain like what is your IDF protocol? And then also, you know, behind you, we see spagyrics there on the wall, and you do sell those. And I definitely was very excited that I saw pine pollen spagyric, and I was like, yeah, I need that. I was like, bring
Totally,
it.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
bring it. Yeah, you know, I tell you guys, after 40, 30, 50, whatever, I'm telling you, a little pine pollen, it's good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I got my mojo back.
Yeah, it's awesome, you know.
Uh,
So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, IDF, what is it? And you know, spagyrics, I don't want to ask what they are because you've said it, you've gone through that so many times, but you know, how can they help people in a to the extent that you can define it, you know,
yeah,
on
brilliant.
online? Yeah.
So within the concept of Aurelian medicine, there are three primary aspects to health that and influencing health that we are able to use and that are useful to the human organism and to every other biological organism, at least that I know of on this planet. Those are information, energy, and matter. Information or data is a very important part, and this corresponds to the soul. This corresponds to sulfur inside of the alchemical catalog of you know, we would call that alchemical philosophy, I suppose. So the information is critical because whatever we feed our informational bodies with is largely going to be the way that they respond. So I can have healthy material in my body and I can have decent energy in my body, but if the information is missing, the matter does not know how to arrange itself and the energy does not know where to flow, how to flow, etc. There's no guidelines for it. There's no data. So what IDF stands for is intrinsic data field, and this is how we provide the organism with information of what it is supposed to be doing and how it's supposed to be doing it. We find that as people's brains have atrophied and are affected by xenotoxins, their capacity to inform their bodies of what to do have decreased massively. And these are things that were innate and going on in the background, either subconsciously or completely unconsciously in the first place. So these aren't things that people need to be like physically conscious of. Most of them were just functions of, say, the organ or the DNA or functions of the cell or whatever. And they knew what to do and they were producing their own coherent informational fields. Well, those coherent informational fields stopped being coherent and started being massively incoherent at some point for most people. And so what we do is we utilize intrinsic data field broadcasts or various different, we call them IDF solutions, to be able to retrain the informational aspects of our being to start working in the proper ways again. And so IDF technology is very important because we can utilize it from an analytical perspective in order to find out what information is missing in the biological organism, whether that's working on trees or animals or humans or ecosystems or whatever else. We find what information is there and how the information is structured and what the caliber of that information is. And we typically measure that, our standard measurements for the main systems that we use are with amplitude. So a lot of people like to think that the types of instruments that we use, like I use the SE5 systems and various families within the SE5s, like the Universal Quantum Interface, the broadcast only instruments, the CHIO instruments, and different types of things like that. I think that they're the most useful and most broad spectrum types of instruments that are out there. But that being said, they oftentimes ask me like, well, will the frequencies that are in there heal me? And I said, well, there's absolutely no frequency. I'm not using frequency. Frequency indicates that something is electromagnetic, and we are not sending electromagnetic energy to you. If we were, that would be the second bullet point that I mentioned, not information, but energy. Energy is largely EMF based or electromagnetic at any rate based. And so this is information. These are what we would refer to as quantum scalar waves or scalar information. And so it is not something that is going to impact you through the same way that electromagnetism would impact you. So like a lot of folks would ask, well, like, what's the difference between a Rife machine and what you're doing? I'd say, well,
Yeah.
enormous differences. Like, one, a Rife machine is actually, you have to be in proximity to it for one, and you have to typically hold on to something or be near something that is emitting an actual frequency, and then the frequency passes through your biofield and it has a direct mechanical interaction with your biofield through the electromagnetism. That's how a Rife machine would work, for instance. What I'm doing, you could be at any distance away from me, and all I'm doing is utilizing, I could use numerous different types of media, hair, blood, semen, any DNA, anything, skin cells, whatever, but I choose to just use a digital photograph. You could also use a Polaroid if you'd like, but a digital photograph works just fine. And then I can analyze you from anywhere in the world that you're at. Presumably, if you were even on Mars or across the solar system or in the Andromeda galaxy, I'd still be able to perform this on you because there's no distance that scalar waves are limited to, as far as we know. There's no limitation of time or space. So you could give me a full body photograph of you as a baby, and I'd be able to analyze you right now just as you are. There's no, again, time does not make a big difference, and space does not make any difference whatsoever. So I'd be able to utilize these types of things in order to analyze what types of information and informational fields are within your space pertaining to various aspects of, say, your wellness. So let's say that you were having liver problems and that you are not dumping enough bile and you have liver stagnation and just this full feeling constantly that puts pressure underneath your right rib cage. Well, what that would essentially mean to me is that I would look into all of the different multitudinous factors that could be impacting the liver.
Uh-oh. Let's see, did we drop? We'll see if you come back here. I see the stream is still up. I don't see him. Oh, it looks like he may have dropped off. Looks like Phoenix might have dropped off there at the critical moment. We'll give it a moment and see if he comes back on. He should be able to. Okay, so he disappeared. All right. We'll see if he can hop back on. If he does, he's able to hop back in. So I think his connectivity just kind of dropped. So let me make sure that I'm still on the internet while we wait here. So talking to Phoenix Aurelius, and we will see here. I'm just checking if my internet is good to go. Yeah, I'm still fast on the internet. So we'll give him a minute. He usually, like I say, if he hops back on, yeah, there he is. There he is. Add to stage. There you are. Okay, looks like we had a drop.
Part of the hiccups of being off grid. So yeah, at any rate, right before that dropped, I was just saying that regardless of distance or whatever, utilizing a photograph or any other piece of thing, I'd be able to analyze what's going on inside of the liver or other effects that may be impacting the liver. Like if the kidneys are overburdened, then that can have an effect on the liver. If the spleen is overburdened. So I could find all these things. And then what I could do is create what is referred to as a broadcast protocol that would be able to perform an IDF balancing. So there are things that should be working that I can send the information that they're working at their ideal rate. And there are things that should not be in the system, like, for instance, certain pathogenic overloads, say Candida, for instance.
Yeah.
Hepatosplenic candidiasis is a very common thing for a lot of people these days. And I would be able to send information to your informational fields, basically saying that that candida issue is actually far, 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 far less. And what we end up seeing is that when we send this type of information, it has an impact on the matter and on the energy of our beings. In the same way that if we take matter, minerals, amino acids, vitamins, physical nutrition, things like this, that's also going to have an impact on your energy and on your intrinsic data. So every level, same thing with energy. If you have an electromagnetic hiccup somewhere, you go do a sound healing session that can enhance your matter and your informational data. So both, all three feedback systems feed into and work interdependently with the other two, and they influence them. And I think that in all of my clinical research time utilizing intrinsic data field work, it goes beyond saying that it's outstandingly effective. Otherwise, I wouldn't have continued on with it. We had, through nothing other than just intrinsic data field balancing, when I first started running wellness research programs to determine how well IDF systems would work, just performing IDF balancing helped 87% of the clients that I was testing. And
Wow.
we weren't giving them anything supplemental along with that, just informational broadcasts, and not even as intensely as I do it these days for my clients. So it's really, really amazing to see how well these types of things work. And of course, certain other scalar technologies like the Spooky 2 and a
Yep.
bunch of other different types of devices or instruments that are out there are able to get very, very similar results. But where people go wrong is that they think that it's magic because it's subtle. Maybe they don't have all the understanding or the philosophical information behind it. And so they think that it's like magic, and it's like, oh, I have a headache. Let me just put in a tuning here to get rid of a headache and send it. And then they'll, send that broadcast to themselves and then say, oh, I still have a headache. That thing doesn't work. Well, that's not the way that it works. You oftentimes, just like you do with physiological issues, if you have a headache, you can't just take something physical that's going to take that headache away without creating some sort of collateral damage. So the types of pharmaceutical medication, what they do is they try and trick your nerves or poison the nerves, literally, to cause the nerve to stop sensing that there's pain, but it never takes care of whatever the root cause of the pain actually is. If you send a tuning for a headache, it's basically that same level of approach, just with a broadcast. And for maybe 1 out of every 20 people or 1 out of every 25 people or whatever, it may have some marginal impact, but it's never getting to the root cause of the problem. What caused the headache in the first place? Was it dehydration? Was it too much zinc? Was it a lack of zinc? Was it what we call in Chinese medicine liver yang rising? Which is, a number of different types of physiological things that could go wrong. Or is it because the kidneys are suffering? Is it because you have been in Wi-Fi zone or exposed to electricity that you now have neurological inflammation? What is it that is actually causing the headache? And then what is beyond that, and what is behind that, and what is behind that? And once we draw all of the root causes that can possibly exist, then we can broadcast to all of the things that we found that were out of balance and help to address it from that informational level. And at the same time, my own particular approach, the reason why we have all of these minerals over here and all of these spagyrics back here behind me, is because I use the matter level and the energy level equally as much as the informational level to ensure that we are approaching wellness on a very holistic level and making sure that all three of those things are necessary so that your body, your energy systems, and your informational fields have everything that they need to be able to structure the entirety of your organism, both subtle as well as dense, in ways that achieve healthy outcomes.
Exactly that. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, we have a, a Spooky 2 here as well. And so is that the IDF? So you're using an SE5 for that. I'm not familiar with that machine. That's just what it's called, SE5 or?
Yeah, that's what it's called. It's the particular unit that we use here. I have an SE5 1000, which is an outdated model. Those aren't for sale anymore, and the SE5 2000 models. I perform almost all of my analysis on the SE5 2000 models, which really just comes with a supplemental piece of equipment known as a precision stick detector, but it allows for pinpoint precision
Mm.
of intrinsic data field investigation or quantum scalar investigation, radionic investigation, however you want to refer to it. I've kind of dropped the whole term radionics because the way that radionics was talked about is that everything in the body has a tuning rate that,
Yes.
this corresponds to that. I've been able to disprove that really easily within just a short period of having the SE5. I can create a tuning that actually has nonsense tuning rates, but has the description of what it is that I'm trying to send. I send it, and it has the same exact effect as if I find this precision tuning rate in a US 2 style, 2-dial tuning, or a 3-dial tuning, or UK 2-dial tuning rate, or just a standard numerical or alphanumeric tuning rate, or Hertz frequency tuning rate. They all have the exact same efficacy. So I have moved completely away from that concept of radionics and all of these huge source books that they give you of
Yes.
like liver corresponds to 04-02.5 or any of these different types of things. It doesn't matter whether you use those or not. It's the description that's important. It's the intention that's important.
Yes.
And we've been able to show that even people who are concentrated with their prayers in praying for these very particular things that I would create as tunings, they're able to impact the individuals that they are praying for almost as well as what I can do with an SE5. The only difference is that they have to be very, very concentrated and focused in their prayers and have to dedicate a ton of conscious time to it. Whereas once I program it into my system, I can just choose it, choose the photograph and get it going. So the prayer group or whatever else moves at about 1/100 millionth the speed that I'm able to move with my tunings. But everybody is an informational being. In part, 1/3 of their entire constitution is information, which means that we are both transmitters and receivers of informational systems all the time. And intention is one of the hugest ways that we can send information. The more clear and precise the intention is, the more clear and precise the result is on the receiving end of that.
Mm. And that's a service that you offer for people?
Well, these days, I'm not offering so much of that service. I did for many years, from 2018 until about 2024. Now, I still do work on a couple of clients, but these are typically really close friends or individuals that have conditions that are still somewhat mysterious from a medical perspective. And I might choose to take a client or two on from time to time that has these mysterious conditions to see if I can figure it out, or quote unquote crack the code of what is going on and what the mechanisms are that are out of balance that are causing that. So like right now I'm actually working on a couple of cases with schizophrenia, and we're also working with a couple of cases of nonverbal autism and a few other things like that in order to determine what are the mechanisms that need to be impacted here, or that are reading at a deficit, that if we change those readings and get rid of the toxins associated with it or whatever else, can we enhance the functionality of the individual? Or in the case of schizophrenia, can we get rid of the C4A and C4B mutations by addressing xenotoxins and providing the right levels of nutrition and other things like that, so that the fornix and the hypothalamus actually work properly and in conjunction with one another, and stop producing auditory hallucinations for the client and susceptibility to entities and electromagnetic energy from impacting them very harshly and negatively. So I do still work on a couple of folks, but not by request. I currently have a growing waiting list because I will work on people again at some point. Right now, my waiting list is approximately 16 years long, though, so it doesn't do much good for people to sign up. I mean, literally, I would have more people than I could ever possibly work on the rest of my life if I started working on people like that again, because there's so many people that are ill. But yeah, so what I have chosen to do instead is to train people how to
Yes.
utilize the systems and how to. So we sell the systems, of course. We're an authorized reseller of the SE5. I've also, for the inventor of the SE5 1000s and 2000s, his name is Dr. Don Paris. He started up a business that was a kind of an adjunct to SE5 systems called CHIOs, or Chi organizers. And we took that business on for him. So we sell a bunch of different CHIO equipment, and I sell advanced IDF solutions for that CHIO equipment. And that makes it really nice because, see, each one of the instruments that I have 9, well, 10 with the Universal Quantum Interface. I have 10 different broadcast instruments, 3 of which are also analysis instruments here in my office. And I only have 24 hours a day that I can send broadcasts through each instrument. And so the cost of a broadcast protocol is based on how much broadcast space do I have available, and how long is your broadcast, how many days, how many weeks, how many months, years, etc. do you need to receive these broadcasts in order for the information to be entrained properly. And the cost is therefore kind of determined upon, by practitioner to practitioner, how many units do they have, how many clients do they have, and how frequently does the person need to be broadcasted to in order to train the information in their field a particular way. So the CHIO instruments are great because I can imprint all of the broadcast data into a hologram, just like you can with Spooky 2. I know that that's a feature that they have with some of their add-ons. Standard Spooky 2 has somewhat limited functionality, but then you can get like the radionics component, you can get this component, you can get that component, all these other things. So that being said, I can imprint all of that data into an IDF hologram, and then we put that on a card, and then we have a scalar antenna that is different for each model that we have. Like we have a personal model that will send it about 2 meters from the center of that unit in direction 360 degrees around you. So we'd call that 2 square meters cubed. It would be the way that we would refer to that. And that ends up basically sending out this field of information of whatever you have on that card. And so we have the standard CHIO stuff that Dr. Don Paris started developing. He has a number of different solutions. I think that they were great at the time that they were developed, but in light of much better scientific research, they are relatively underwhelming in terms of approaching all of the potential things that could be going on with an individual. And so I have also started to produce much more advanced IDF solutions for those that people can also buy as a card, and they can utilize that. So, we have some for allergies, we have some for this, we have some for that. And I make very particular ones for like aspects of Aurelian medicine. So intracellular toxins, heavy metal elimination, parasitic, standard parasitic infections, all sorts of different types of things. And the newest instrument that we also have too is called the Universal Quantum Interface. And this is a broadcast only instrument in that you cannot perform any analysis on it. But there's a lot of really cool functionality on here. It's a cloud-ready instrument, and there's a lot of free downloadable material on the Universal Quantum Interface, and the free downloads are growing daily, basically. Don is really working on creating a lot more free stuff. And then there's a bunch of paid things that you can get on here that are usually about $3.99 for a 30-day rental. And so they're very, very affordable solutions. Things like even increasing cash flow, things that actually help people's life. There's one on here that's called Heal the Earth, which I think is absolutely fantastic. There are agricultural balancing programs on here. There's all sorts of different types of things on here. And so this is really cool. But then SE5 users like myself with the SE5 Pro software, you can't do it with the legacy software, but with the Pro software, I can actually make a custom protocol for you and send it directly to your universal quantum interface. All I need to do is have the email that's associated with your universal interface account, and then I can put together an entire broadcast protocol, send it to you, and now you have it downloaded on your instrument. And what's cool about this is you can upload photos of whomever or whatever you want to send these broadcasts to. And that makes it really cool because now you can also be a practitioner. You know, you may want to use it on yourself first, but you're like, hey, Fee sent me this intracellular toxins broadcast, and I've been taking binders for a long time, getting heavy metals and whatever else out of my system. And then I started this, and that was what helped me really turn a page. So they might be able to take on a few clients, guide them through similar protocols, and then send this to them and charge their client whatever they want in order to send them the same broadcast that I charge them for. Now, typically, all of the cards that I make, all of the, what we call them advanced IDF solutions that I make for folks for the CHIOs, all of those can be sent to Universal Quantum Interface 2. I don't ever do like a 30-day rental type of thing. I charge $75 for my for all of my work, and you pay it once and then you have it for life. So
Yeah.
you know, I just do it that way. Otherwise I have to, you know, come up with some sort of system to remind me, like, oh, in 30 days contact Joe and tell him that his thing's about to expire. It's way too complicated over here on my end. I'd rather just $75 one-time fee, you have it for life, use it on whoever and whatever you want. So.
That's amazing. And I have worked with some of those technologies, and I can definitely attest that, you know, at least for us, it was and is and continues being a success. And especially on the analysis side, it can be a bit mind-blowing, because I remember I was not to make it all about guns, but I was actually out at the range shooting, and then I actually had an analysis, and they were able to pick up on. They said, you know, have you been around cordite? You know, I was like, yeah. As a matter of fact, just the other day, you know, they're like, yeah, because we can kind of see it spiking in your system, and it's really amazing. So it will, if anyone has their doubts or their interests, you know, definitely you want to go to. Let me pull it up right here. You definitely want to go to phoenixaurelius.org and start there and check these things out. And if you get an analysis done, it will really speak to you and it will prove itself. You know, I've always been amazed, continue to be at the analysis function, because at least for me, it has always pulled out things that were specific, that I would know that you couldn't just be making this up. This is not generic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. We actually had an attorney years ago contact us, not for legal repercussions, but just contacting us, and he was very much so a skeptic, and he said, so would you be able to tell me what area of my body I just hurt? And I said, I mean, sure. And he was like, well, I want you to put your money where your mouth is. And if you can tell me what area I hurt, then I'll consider actually going forward with your services. And I said, all right, cool. You know, give me a day or two. This isn't my top priority, is not to try and prove to you that this thing works. But when I catch a little bit of downtime, I'll get around to it and I'll just tag you back and we can go from there. So I just scanned for various appendages and areas of the body, and it just kept coming up that his left ankle was all buggered. And so I said, yeah, left ankle. And I ran a couple of investigations, which are just general questions like, is it true that blah, 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 blah happened? I did this for maybe only 5 minutes. And I said, you know, it looks like you either stepped weird off of a stair or that you weren't paying attention. You fell and then caught yourself as you slipped off of a stair, but it looks like your left ankle is all buggered. And he was just like, wow, spot on. That's exactly what happened. Like, I was walking down the stairs, somebody called to me and I looked behind me and I stepped weird and I rolled my ankle. And I said, well, there you have it.
Oh, that's amazing. That is amazing. And of course, you have your spagyrics, which definitely are on the site. And right now, it's definitely helpful if anybody is interested, thinks maybe, maybe not, it's a great time to get some spagyrics to check them out, or any other of Phoenix Aurelius' services, because they are building a new, I guess, a new training facility. You're kind of expanding. So you guys moved to your off grid, but now you have
Right.
to do some expansion, which definitely costs some money. And
Yeah.
so this is a great time to help. I wouldn't say help Phoenix Relias out, but really help yourself out as well, just as much,
Yeah,
if not
exactly.
more.
I mean, it just becomes a win-win situation. All of
Yeah.
my products have always been great for people who need, any sort of wellness boost or whatever else. But right now, it's a win-win situation because I need to make a lot more space here for new products that we're making and to expand our facility. And we have a 40% off sale going on right now, and they'll continue to stay at like 40% off. And I have some of the most rare, most amazing, most medicinal herbs that you could ever possibly imagine. And some of these aren't selling because people just literally don't know how amazing they are. Like if they were to type in any one of the herbs that I have and, maybe even get Chat GPT or Grok or somebody else that can pull up tons of metadata, just be like, hey, what are these things used for? And what would a spagyric tincture of this thing be used for? I mean, it will tell you precisely. And that's
Mm.
the way that we get around, we've been telling people to do that if they have those accounts or have, don't have an ethical dilemma utilizing that type of artificial intelligence, because it will tell you very particularly what the chemical constituents are, what makes it into the 95% ethanol that we use, what esters are actually made, what those are good for. I mean, you can perform all of the scientific research and know
Mm.
exactly, on no uncertain circumstances, of what to use here in my apothecary. And it will also be able to, if you say, he used this amount of herb and this amount of alcohol, which is on the pictures of every single bottle, which is on my website, it tells you how much alcohol I used and what percentage of alcohol and how much biomass I used. And you would be able to program this in and then ask it, how much should I take to help address this symptom? And it
Oh,
will
wow.
actually provide you with all of that information in ways that I am legally prohibited from being able to do that. You would be able to provide all of that information for yourself. And I mean, literally, the highest quality herbs, resins, flowers, everything I have sourced and spent way more money and time sourcing the very best of the very best from all of the places for the last like 20 years. So the things that are on this apothecary shelf are really, really, really next level medicines. They're pharmaceutical grade medicines, but 100% natural. And there's, aside from things that I've wild harvested or grown in my own gardens that are not certified organic, because I'm not going to pay exorbitant
Yeah.
fees for a dumb certification. Everything else that I haven't done that way, wild harvested or grown, is either certified biodynamic, ecodynamic,
Mm.
or certified biodynamic as well, Demeter certified biodynamic. So we have extremely, extremely high quality products here. And I was just going through some of these yesterday with my wife, and she was like, why do you think some of these haven't sold? And I said, well, in the case of like bachelor's button flowers, I mean, people think that they're a cute little thing that you could throw into some salad sometimes. They don't realize that they're packed full of antioxidants. They don't
Oh,
realize that there's a ton of nitrogen in them, and that most people are very deficient in the amount of nitrogen that they have because they're not eating fresh blooming things anymore.
wow.
There's just like so many things like that where I have all of this knowledge and understanding of how to use it, but because we're a research organization, I'm not allowed to tell people why they would want to use that. We're legally prohibited from that. The only thing that I can do is say historically that's been used for this, or we found this thing, but I can't draw lines and say this thing that we made that synthesized this ester naturally through the spagyric process will actually cure blah 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 blah. But they do that, and now you can find all that information out for yourself just by utilizing Chat or Grok or these other ones that are available.
That's amazing. So everybody, Biodynamic spagyrics, 40% off. I mean, it sells itself. In fact, I'll be getting some
Good.
after this, you know. And well, and also, of course, and I guess it's a good time to wrap things up because I don't want to keep you forever. You've been very generous with your time. We definitely appreciate it. And just wanted to mention, when you go to phoenixaurelius.org, there is training there. There's you can definitely learn more about everything that Phoenix Aurelius does, more about spagyrics. There are courses there. I think he has them on Teachable as a platform. So you can just learn all that you would like to. And you have an in-person training coming up soon if people have the ability to go. And I believe that's just going to be, is that the first one that you're doing? But I imagine it won't be your last, right? That's probably in the works in the future.
Well, it's the first one that we're doing here since we moved, but
Okay.
I've been teaching and training people in person for
Oh,
to 25 years. Then, yeah, I was training people in how to make spagyrics shortly after I learned myself.
mm,
I'd master a certain skill and then teach that skill, and that's the way that that's gone. So this is just going to be the first time that I am teaching since we got here. And because 95% of my lab is still in storage back in Utah, there's only limited curriculum that I can actually teach right now. And we're doing it at a beautiful, beautiful state
yes.
park. But when you do it at another person's facility, there's usually, insurance and liability things. So they told me, we can't do your whole normal spiel that you usually do. We don't want you distilling alcohol and other things for insurance purposes, but we don't mind you having alcohol and teaching people how to make spagyric tinctures, and you can start fires here and camp here and do all the things. So we have a really, really awesome event coming up August 4th, 5th, and 6th, I believe it is, at Holly River State Park. And we can hold like up to 25, and I think about half of those seats have sold as of the time of making this video. So we still definitely have room for anybody who wants to come and learn how to take health and wellness into their own hands. And I also demonstrate how I use the IDF equipment to even determine how many grams of a particular herb to how many milliliters of a particular thing, and how to balance and clear the information of all of the herbs and all of the things in order to make it the head and shoulders above anything that you could ever think about buying or making elsewhere. So
Oh, that's great. So, yeah, at this training, even though Phoenix Aurelius will not be summoning a dragon, actually, like,
no
because
problem.
yeah, because of liability. But maybe in the future,
Exactly.
I'll definitely go into that one. Okay, well, Phoenix Aurelius, phoenixaurelius.org. Thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate it. Great to catch up. I think we really put out a lot of content, a lot of data that I really think is going to be very targeted and find exactly who needs it. So I look forward to seeing how this unfolds and the feedback that we get.
Yeah, me too, Craig. Yeah, and I guess as a final
Yes.
comment for some of our listeners, I'd just like to say, today we covered some really heavy types of concepts, and it would be really easy to get down on like, well, what's the point or the purpose of it anyway? And all I would ask you to do is, or give you the invitation to do is to answer that, but the answer has to be a personal answer. You cannot come up with a collective or a social answer for what is the purpose of anything right now. It's always been that way, but it's even more important. What is the purpose of your life right now? What's going to bring you the most happiness, the most joy, and how can you live today so that you don't have regrets, just like you were talking about earlier, Craig, because that makes today worth living and tomorrow worth hoping for. And I think that that's the most important thing for us to be centered around, possibly more now than ever.
Yeah, exactly. That's why this is all very poignant, and at the perfect time, it'll reach the perfect people. So thank you so much once again. All right.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.